Hi friends, welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome to my channel. I'm Kenzie, and today I'll be reading Reddit stories from people who believe that they saw cryptids. This first story comes from user bigballsblue, very nice username. Not a deer / skinwalker / something sighting. This occurred at midnight in Berlin, Maryland on October 30th through 31st. I was riding with my friend Isaac on very rural backroads this night, and prior to the sighting, there was some extremely unusual occurrences that had already taken place, which I'll go into detail about now. At about 9:30, we were driving to one of Isaac's friend's house, and noticed we were being followed by a small hatchback with its lights off for probably 8 or so miles, before it turned into an empty parking lot, stopped for about 20 seconds, and then pulled across the street into a Walmart parking lot, and parked facing the direction we were going with the lights on. After this happened, and we had gone to said friend's house, we took an alternate and longer route home than usual. We had turned onto the highway, and nothing unusual was happening until we turned onto the back roads of Berlin. Isaac had begun complaining about blurry vision and a headache immediately after I saw what looked like a large humanoid figure jump from what looked like 10 to 15 feet into the air out of the bushes. I was the only one out of the two of us to see this. About 1.5 miles down the road, past a bend, we both saw an extremely deformed and unusually moving deer. Its legs seemed to bend inward, and its snout was moving in a way that it absolutely was not meant to. It was curling all the way back nearly into its eyes. It was also darting back and forth extremely fast with its strange inward bending legs. It was horrifying to watch, and even scarier so that there was an opossum that was crossing the road, which we had to slow down for only 15 feet in front of this, quote, deer. Interestingly, about 45 minutes earlier, we had to slow down for a different opossum on a different stretch of road, and immediately saw a deer standing near the road afterward. Me and Isaac were both very disturbed by this sighting, and we haven't spoken about it since. I have had nightmares about seeing the, quote, deer ever since. The deer had normal coloration and about the size of a doe, had no antlers, and I don't recall it having very visible or large ears. It made no noise as we passed by. I had a good visual of the, quote, deer for roughly 15 to 20 seconds before we passed it. We were driving about 45 to 50 miles per hour, and Isaac saw it shortly after I had pointed it out. Immediately after seeing it, I felt immensely anxious and also sad to the point where I almost cried for no conscious reason. I am still disturbed as to what I saw and hope to never see it again. This next story comes from user wasted__account 2. 2 years ago today, I encountered a Wendigo. So one thing before I tell my story. I put Wendigo in quotes because I live in Central California in historically Miwok land, which from what little I know about Wendigos is quite a ways away from where they're normally seen. So if someone knows of similar Miwok folklore, I'd love to hear it. Anyway, here goes. 2 years ago, I and a group of 3 other friends decided to go to Humboldt County for a weekend. We go see Fern Canyon, tour the HSU campus, and have a fun 4-day weekend camping on the beach. On Sunday, it's time to come home. It was a 12-hour drive to where I was dropping my friends off, which I drove the entire duration of. By the time I drop them off and start the last hour-long drive back to my house, it's a little after 9 p.m. and completely dark out. Now, the 2 routes that someone can take between where my friends live and where I live cross 2 different bridges over a lake. I decide to take the main highway, as it's a little longer than the other road, but has fewer turns to navigate. The difference between the 2 routes was only about 2 miles or so. As I'm about at the halfway point of the bridge, I notice in my headlights there's something on the shoulder. I slow down a bit to make sure I'm able to move over if needed, and as I get closer, I'm able to make out what it is. Standing on the side of the road was a 7 to 8 foot tall bipedal humanoid creature. It looked emancipated with ghost white skin that was stretched tight across its bones. Now, I obviously wasn't going to stop and get a closer look at it, but when I looked in the rearview mirror to see if I could make out any other features on this thing, there was nothing there. It had completely vanished. The rest of my drive home was uneventful, and when I woke up the next morning, I brushed off what I saw as exhaustion from the long weekend and the 12 hours of driving I had done before seeing whatever it was. That is, until Tuesday, when I was talking with one of my friends who had gone on a trip. She told me that one of her friends had been driving on the other bridge Monday night and saw a creature exactly like what I had seen. That's when I told her what I had seen the night before her friend, and she suggested it might have been a Wendigo. Before then, I had maybe heard the name once or twice, but hadn't paid much attention, as I wasn't much interested in cryptids and ghost stories before then, and wasn't really on the internet enough to know what they were. This next story comes from user LeahIsAwake. Suddenly making sense. When I was a little girl, we lived in this rural neighborhood in central Virginia. Right now the subdivision is filled with houses, but back then there were only about 5 houses along our road. My house backed up to a patch of woods that even today is a good size, with a straight shot to a national park. We've had run-ins with everything from black bears to bobcats on that property. Anyway, this story happens when I was 7 or 8 years old, after we'd just moved into the house. I was walking our black lab puppy down the road when all of a sudden, Bear stopped. He turned to the lot across the street from my house and started growling. This particular lot would have a house on it 2 years later, but for now it was wild. A dirt ramp of sorts, undoubtedly put in for a future driveway when the lot was sold, led up to a hill probably 10 feet or so. The whole thing, including the ramp, was overgrown with tall grass to the tree line, then a decent-sized patch of trees. Bear continued growling towards the empty lot, and I, being an adventurous sort of kid, decided to investigate. This was the 90s. I spent my childhood exploring every inch of my neighborhood, including that lot. We climbed the grassed-over ramp and peered into the woods. Bear continued to bark and growl, but I was unimpressed. There was nothing there, or so I thought. From behind one of those trees peeked a human figure that moved in a very unhuman way. I never got a good look at it. It was silhouetted inside the trees while I was standing in the bright daylight, but its large, buggy eyes stared back at me and my dog. I ran home as fast as I could. My best friend saw one in our woods not too long after that, and she described it as white in color. Together we created this mythos of dinosaurs living in the woods. Shut up, we were 7 and Jurassic Park had just come out. We spent years looking for them, building traps for our dinosaurs, disarming the traps they set for us, and just generally being kids in the woods. As I grew up, I decided that what I saw was probably just a black bear standing on its hind legs, but that description never sat well with me. Bears have a sort of lumbering way they move, even when they're young and small. This was fast and lithe. Bears also have a muzzle, and there was no muzzle on what I saw. Also, what about my friend's sighting? Then I came across this subreddit, and I 100% believe what I saw that day, and what my friend saw later was a crawler. So thank you guys for solving an almost 30-year mystery. This next story comes from a user that I will not say, but I will put in the description of this video. Skinwalker? Tonight I fell into a random deep hole of YouTube as per normal. The topic of this hole happened to be skinwalkers and wendigos. After spending about 3 or 4 hours of listening and watching descriptions of these things, I was hit with a memory that I am currently tearing up about after blocking it out of my head for so long, and decided that it belonged on this subreddit. This happened 5 or so years ago when I was about 15. I was part of a camp that took place in the deep woods in the Northeast, and while there were many strange things that happened at this camp, I brushed them off. The cabins themselves were pretty far into the woods and a good 10-minute walk from the main camp. Thankfully, the staff and counselors had us go everywhere in groups of 3 whenever we had to leave their supervision. A lot of the girls in my cabin had to take night meds, which meant at about 9:30, 3 of us had to walk to the health cabin about 20 minutes away every night. Most of the time, I was in the group of 3, as one of the girls with meds was my best friend. There were a few nights where, as we were walking on the trail to the health cabin, we would hear our names being called from the forest, or we would hear some whistling, or just very human-like noises. Being the chickens we were at the time, thank God, we never went off trail to check it out. Every year, each cabin would go on an overnight, which meant we would hike decently far up the mountain to actually camp in tents and all that. Each cabin consisted of about 8 people, including the 2 counselors supervising us, and each cabin would go on their overnight at different times, meaning we were the only cabin in those woods at the time. While the weird noises and name-calling on the main camp freaked me out a bit, nothing scared me as much as this one overnight. We had several tents that could have 2 of us in each, which I shared with the before-mentioned best friend. Being the dumbasses we were, we decided to put our tent a bit farther away from everyone else so the counselors wouldn't hear us talking after we were supposed to be asleep. Fast forward to nighttime. We're having a great time playing truth or dare, gossiping, etc. We decided to go to sleep around 1 or so. Everything was normal until I feel my friend vigorously shaking me awake. I start to ask what's wrong as she quickly shushes me to be quiet. "Do you hear that?" she whispered to me, visibly distraught. Reluctant and sleep-deprived, I make somewhat of an effort to listen to whatever she was hearing. When I say my heart dropped, and I have never been washed over with such a feeling of confusion and horror, I mean it. I heard my name being said, not just by anyone, but my mom. My mother, who was currently a 23-hour drive from where I was, now sounding as if she was 20 feet away from my tent at 4 in the morning. As I asked my friend what she was hearing, she told me she had heard the same thing. I wish she hadn't given me confirmation on the next to impossible thing I was trying to convince myself I was imagining. It went on for another 5 minutes with both of us sitting there like deer in headlights. Eerie silence filled the air as the name-calling stopped. The silence was quickly filled by a heavy breathing, but this time it didn't sound human. It was like the sound of a bull breathing, and was now about 5 feet from the tent. We sat there, shivering with our blankets pulled over our heads as our only defense. The next 20 minutes of the sound of breathing moving around the outside of our tent felt like hours. As quickly as the silence left, it then returned again. The blanket was then lifted off of our heads, thinking whatever creature we were hearing had left. Then suddenly the most ear-shattering, distressed scream could be heard from what sounded like a mile away. It was almost human-sounding, if said human was being brutally tortured and murdered. These screams went on for about an hour until the sun started to rise. At this point, with the safety of the sun's light, we decided to fall back asleep. No one else had heard these things, and to this day I haven't been able to come up with a rational explanation. And that's all the stories I have for today. If you like this video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe so you know when I post next. Put your paranormal stories in the comments and I'll possibly read them in a video. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!